The doors of the council chamber did not open so much as unfold, layers of translucent alloy sliding over one another like liquid glass deciding to become solid. Navarre had seen recordings of alien architecture before, but standing in front of it felt different. It felt like the building itself was watching him, judging him, and quietly deciding he was underdressed for whatever was about to happen. He adjusted the collar of his uniform anyway. "Relax," muttered the voice in his earpiece. "Commander Area, back on the human cruiser. You look like a perfectly acceptable representative of humanity. Slightly nervous, but statistically within tolerance." "That's reassuring," Navarre whispered. "I've always wanted to be statistically acceptable." The chamber opened fully, and the light inside was wrong. Not dim, not bright, just precise. Every surface glowed softly, as if the room had calculated the exact illumination needed to reveal everything and hide nothing. Floating arcs of data drifted in the air, shifting languages, symbols, and star maps folding into each other. At the center, a long table hovered a few centimeters above the floor, its surface rippling faintly like calm water that had learned discipline. And at the far end of that table stood her, Queen Eriseth. Navarre had studied her profile for weeks. Height, posture, known behavioral patterns, linguistic structures, even the political weight of how she tilted her head during negotiations. None of that prepared him for the actual moment of seeing her. She looked human, almost. Her features were refined, calm, composed with a precision that felt engineered rather than accidental. Her skin carried a soft, pale tone, unmarked and luminous under the chamber's calculated light. Her hair fell in smooth, controlled lines over her shoulders, and her expression was the kind that could end wars or start them, depending on how long she held it. But it was her ears that disrupted everything. Long, elegant, unmistakably inhuman. They curved slightly backward, giving her silhouette a quiet, unmistakable otherness. They were not exaggerated, not grotesque, just enough to remind him that she was not from his world, even if everything else about her tried to convince him otherwise. Navarre took a step forward, then another, his boots making no sound on the floor. That bothered him slightly. Floors were supposed to make sound. Sound was reassuring. Silent floors felt like they were waiting for something. "Ambassador Navarre," announced one of the alien attendants, its voice smooth and almost musical. "Representative of the Terran Coalition." Navarre resisted the urge to bow too early, too late, or in the wrong cultural direction. He settled for a controlled nod. "Your Majesty," he said, hoping the translator didn't decide to turn that into something embarrassing. For a brief, terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then Eriseth stepped forward. She moved with the kind of control that suggested gravity was more of a suggestion to her than a rule. Her gaze settled on him, steady, unblinking. And something changed. Navarre felt it before he understood it. A shift so subtle it could have been imagined. Her expression didn't break, didn't soften, didn't harden, but her eyes paused. Not in confusion, recognition. He frowned, just slightly. The kind of expression he would later regret analyzing for hours. He searched her face for any sign of what he thought he saw, but found only composure. "Ambassador," she said. Her voice was clear, measured, carrying a tone that seemed to resonate slightly longer than it should have, as if the room itself was reluctant to let it fade. Navarre straightened instinctively. "Queen Eriseth, it's an honor to—" He stopped, because she was still looking at him. Not as one looks at a diplomat, not even as one looks at an opponent, as one looks at a memory that has unexpectedly become real. Navarre cleared his throat. "To meet you." Smooth, he thought. Very smooth. Nearly professional. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small, unhelpful thought surfaced. "Do not say anything strange. This is not the time." Eriseth tilted her head slightly. It was a small movement, precise, controlled, and yet for reasons Navarre could not explain, it felt familiar. "I remember you, human," she said. Navarre blinked. There were many appropriate responses to that sentence. He did not choose any of them. "I would have remembered that," he replied. A silence followed, a long one. Behind him, one of his advisors made a noise that could have been a cough or a quiet attempt to resign from existence. Navarre immediately regretted everything. Ariseth did not react the way he expected. There was no offense, no correction. Instead, something almost imperceptible shifted at the corner of her lips. Not quite a smile, but close enough to be dangerous. "Yes," she said softly. "I thought you might say that." Navarre exhaled slowly, trying to regain control of the situation. This was a negotiation, not a personal conversation. Focus. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "there is some misunderstanding. I have reviewed all prior contact records between our species, and—" "There are no records," she interrupted. Her tone remained calm, but the certainty in it landed with more weight than any raised voice could have carried. Navarre hesitated. "That would make remembering me statistically unlikely," he said, before he could stop himself. Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, Ariseth let out the faintest breath of something that might have been amusement. "Your ability to reduce improbable events to statistics," she said, "remains unchanged." Navarre froze. "Remains?" He searched his memory again, more urgently this time. Faces, places, fragments of childhood. Dust, heat, voices he could no longer fully hear. Nothing. "I believe," he said slowly, "you may be confusing me with someone else." Ariseth studied him for a moment longer, and this time, there was no mistaking it. There was disappointment there. Not sharp, not accusing, just quiet. "Yes," she said at last. "For your sake, I had hoped that was true." Navarre had faced hostile commanders, malfunctioning AI councils, and once an automated defense turret that politely apologized before trying to eliminate him. None of those experiences prepared him for the quiet discomfort of standing in a room where an alien queen insisted she remembered him, and he absolutely did not return the favor. He straightened slightly, deciding that the safest course of action was to behave like someone who definitely understood what was happening. "Your Majesty," he said, carefully measured, "if I may ask, from where do you remember me?" Behind him, one of his advisors shifted just enough to suggest that this question ranked somewhere between bold and professionally reckless. Ariseth did not answer immediately. Instead, she moved past him with calm, deliberate steps, circling the floating table. The holographic constellations adjusted around her as if they were mildly intimidated. "You asked directly," she said. "I find it reduces the number of disasters," Navarre replied. "That is debatable." He allowed himself a small, cautious smile. "I prefer manageable disasters." That earned him another almost smile. It was brief, controlled, but undeniably there. Progress, he thought. Strange, confusing progress. Ariseth reached the opposite side of the table and turned to face him again. The soft light traced the sharp lines of her posture, her long ears casting faint, elegant shadows behind her. "You do not remember the settlement," she said. Navarre's mind reacted instantly, searching, scanning, reaching for anything that matched the word. Settlement, dust, wind, a flicker of something. He frowned. "We've had many settlements. Most of them ended poorly. It's not a strong category for memorable experiences." "That one lasted 11 months, she said. "Longer than most of yours." He winced slightly. "We prefer to think of those as brief experimental successes." One of the alien attendants made a soft, unfamiliar sound that might have been laughter or a mechanical glitch. It was difficult to tell. Ariseth did not react to it. Her gaze remained fixed on Navarre, steady and unrelenting. "You were there," she continued. "A child. You spent most of your time attempting to repair devices you did not understand." Navarre opened his mouth, then closed it. "That does narrow it down," he admitted, "but only slightly." Another flicker, this time stronger. A structure made of uneven metal panels. A broken signal tower leaning at an angle that suggested optimism rather than engineering. A voice, sharp, impatient, insisting that he was holding the tool incorrectly. He shook his head as if the motion could dislodge the memory before it formed properly. "I'm sorry," he said more quietly now. "I still don't." You argued with me, Ariseth said. Navarre paused. That, he said slowly, sounds more likely. Her expression shifted again, just slightly. You insisted that your design was more efficient, she continued. It was not. Navarre felt something click. Not a full memory, not even close, but a shape, a feeling, annoyance, determination, the absolute certainty of being right, followed immediately by the undeniable proof of being wrong. He exhaled. I've maintained that pattern into adulthood, he said. It's comforting to know I was consistent. For the first time, Ariseth's composure cracked. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough. A quiet breath left her, unmistakably amused. You collapsed the entire structure, she said. Navarre raised a hand defensively. In my defense, it was structurally unsound before I improved it. You removed its only support. I was optimizing. You were guessing. I prefer the term experimental engineering. There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, one of the floating holograms above the table flickered, displaying a small structural diagram, crooked lines, unstable angles, and a highlighted section labeled in an unfamiliar script. Navarre stared at it. That looks familiar, he admitted. Ariseth glanced at the projection. You called it a tower, she said. It was not a tower. It had vertical ambition, Navarre replied. Another silence, but this one felt different. Lighter. The tension that had filled the chamber earlier had shifted, thinned, as if the room itself was uncertain whether it was still hosting a diplomatic negotiation or something far less formal. Navarre leaned slightly closer to the hologram, studying it. I remember this part, he said, pointing to a section that looked particularly unstable. This is where everything went wrong. You mean where you made it worse? Yes, that. He hesitated. Then slowly he looked back at her. The pieces were still scattered, incomplete, fragments without a full picture. But something was there now, something real. I remember someone, he said. Not clearly, just impressions. Ariseth did not move. Someone who kept correcting me, he added. That was necessary. Someone who refused to admit when they were also wrong. That was efficient. Navarre almost laughed. Someone, he said more softly, who didn't belong there. That was the moment everything stilled. The holograms paused mid-motion. The ambient hum of the chamber seemed to fade. Ariseth's gaze did not change, but something behind it did. Yes, she said. Navarre studied her face, searching for the connection that still refused to fully form. I don't remember your name, he admitted. A quiet breath passed between them. I know, she said. He hesitated. Then, because his instincts had never once protected him from saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, he added, I'm also starting to suspect I probably pronounced it wrong. For a fraction of a second, something bright flickered in her expression. Not power, not authority, something older. You did, she said. Navarre nodded slowly. That feels accurate. The chamber remained silent, not tense, not hostile, just waiting. And for the first time since he had stepped through those unfolding doors, Navarre had the distinct, unsettling feeling that this meeting was no longer about diplomacy. It was about remembering something that had been waiting far too long to be remembered. Navarre became aware of something strange. No one else in the chamber was speaking. That realization came slowly, like noticing you had been holding your breath for too long. The advisors, the attendants, the quiet systems humming in the walls, they were all present, all active, but none of them interrupted. It was as if the room itself had decided that whatever was happening between him and the Queen was more important than the entire purpose of the meeting. He wasn't sure whether to be honored or deeply concerned. So, Navarre said, because silence had never been his strongest skill, just to clarify, we are currently discussing a childhood structural failure instead of a cross-species treaty. One of his advisors made a small choking sound. Ariseth did not look away from him. Both are connected. Navarre blinked. That is a worrying statement? She turned slightly, gesturing with a minimal movement of her hand. The table responded instantly, its surface rippling outward as the holographic projection expanded. The crooked structure he had recognized earlier dissolved, replaced by a wide, detailed reconstruction. A settlement, not a memory this time, a precise model. Dust-colored terrain stretched outward under a pale sky. Modular human buildings formed a loose perimeter, their designs practical but temporary, like everything humanity built when it wasn't sure it would be allowed to stay. At the center stood the tower, leaning, unstable, familiar. Navarre stared at it. "That's not just a model," he said quietly. "No," Ariseth replied. "It is a reconstruction based on recorded data." His head turned sharply toward her. "Recorded by who?" She met his gaze evenly. "By me." That answer landed harder than expected. Navarre stepped closer to the table, drawn in despite himself. The projection shifted subtly as he moved, adjusting angles, refining details. He could see the small imperfections now, the patched panels, the uneven pathways, the places where someone had clearly improvised instead of following any official plan. "That's, accurate," he admitted. "Uncomfortably accurate." He pointed toward one of the structures. "That building was supposed to be storage, but someone kept turning it into a workshop." "You," Ariseth said. Navarre nodded. "That tracks." Another flicker, stronger this time. He saw hands, smaller, younger, covered in dust, holding tools that were too large, too complicated. He heard a voice again, sharper now, clearer. "You are holding it wrong." He exhaled slowly. "You were there the whole time," he said, more to himself than to her. "Yes." He glanced back at her. "That doesn't explain why I don't remember you." Ariseth was silent for a moment. Then she reached forward and made a subtle gesture over the projection. The settlement shifted. Figures appeared. Not detailed faces, not full identities, just outlines moving through the space, recreating patterns of activity. Among them, two smaller figures near the tower. Navarre leaned in. "That's—" He stopped. The figures were simplified, but the positions, the movements, they felt right. One of them was clearly him, standing too close to the structure, making a gesture that suggested confidence completely unsupported by evidence. The other figure stood across from him, arms folded in a posture that radiated disapproval even without a face. Navarre tilted his head. "I feel judged." "You were," Ariseth said. "That seems unfair. I was doing my best." "You were dismantling the only functioning relay. I was improving it. You removed the stabilizer. I thought it was unnecessary." "You were incorrect." Navarre nodded slowly. "In my defense, I was young." "You were always young," she replied. He paused, then smirked slightly. "That feels like a philosophical insult." A faint shift touched her expression again. So brief it could have been missed, but he saw it. Progress. He looked back at the projection, focusing on the second figure. "You're telling me that's you," he said. "Yes." Navarre frowned. "Then why can't I remember your face?" The question lingered. Ariseth's gaze moved just slightly toward the projection before returning to him. "Because you were not supposed to," she said. That was new. Navarre straightened. "That sounds deliberate." "It was." He crossed his arms, considering. "So I didn't forget you. I was prevented from remembering you." "Yes." He let out a quiet breath. "That's mildly unsettling." One of his advisors finally spoke up, voice cautious. "Ambassador, perhaps we should return to the negotiation." "No," Navarre said, without looking away from Ariseth. "I think this is the negotiation." The advisor stopped. The chamber fell silent again. Navarre turned his attention fully back to her. "Why?" he asked. "Why hide yourself? Why erase whatever this was?" Ariseth did not answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer to the table, her presence shifting the light, the air, the entire balance of the room. The projection adjusted around her, the small figure that represented her younger self aligning with her current position. "For protection," she said at last. "Not yours." Navarre studied her. "Yours," he said. "Yes." He looked back at the smaller figure again, the one that had stood across from him, correcting him, arguing with him, refusing to let him dismantle everything in peace. You didn't belong there, he said. No. And if anyone had known, the outcome would have been different. Navarre nodded slowly. That's a polite way of saying disastrous. It is an accurate way. He glanced at her again, something sharper in his expression now. So you hid who you were, he said. You spent 11 months in a human settlement, arguing with a child who clearly had no idea what he was doing. I had an idea, Navarre muttered. And then you left, he finished. Yes. And you made sure I wouldn't remember you. Yes. Navarre was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed. That feels slightly unfair, he said. Ariseth tilted her head. Unfair? Yes, I mean, you remember everything. I get vague impressions and a strong sense that I was frequently wrong. You were frequently wrong. That's not the point. Another pause. Then unexpectedly, Navarre smiled. Small but genuine. I think I would have liked to remember you, he said. The words hung in the air. Simple, uncomplicated. And for the first time since the meeting began, Ariseth did not respond immediately. Something in her expression shifted, deeper than before, less controlled. The projection flickered once, as if reacting to something it could not fully process. Navarre noticed. Was that me? He asked, gesturing toward the hologram. Or is your system just emotionally invested in this conversation? It is adaptive, she said, so it's judging me too. It is observing. That's worse. For a brief moment, the tension eased again, just enough to breathe. Navarre looked at the projection one last time, then back at her. I still don't remember your name, he said. Ariseth's gaze held his. I know, she replied. He hesitated. Then, with the same reckless instinct that had guided him through most of his life, he said, You could tell me again. The chamber stilled, not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, as if the entire room understood that something important had just been offered. Ariseth regarded him for a long moment. Then she said softly, Not yet. Navarre had the distinct feeling that he had just failed a test he didn't know he was taking. Not yet, he repeated, as if saying it again might unlock a hidden explanation. It did not. Behind him, one of his advisors shifted in a way that suggested a strong desire to intervene and a stronger understanding that doing so would be a terrible idea. The room remained still, balanced on something fragile and invisible. Navarre exhaled through his nose. That is not the answer I was hoping for. I am aware, Ariseth said. He nodded once. Good. At least we agree on something. The projection between them dimmed slightly, as if the system had decided the childhood reconstruction had reached its maximum usefulness, or emotional complexity. The figures dissolved, leaving only the faint outline of the settlement before it, too, faded into a clean, reflective surface. Navarre glanced down at the table. I feel like I just lost a very small, very confusing piece of my life. You did not lose it, Ariseth replied. It was never accessible. That is a comforting distinction, he said dryly. Like saying a door isn't locked, it just doesn't exist. She studied him for a moment, her long ears tilting ever so slightly, as if adjusting to a frequency only she could hear. You are attempting humor, she observed. It's a coping mechanism, Navarre said. Humans use it when confronted with existential confusion or highly advanced alien royalty. That seems inefficient. It's extremely efficient. It prevents panic. Are you panicking? Not yet, he admitted, but I'm keeping the option open. For the briefest instant, something almost softened in her gaze again. Something that did not belong to a queen, but to someone who remembered what it was like to argue over broken machines in the dust. Navarre noticed it, and that made it worse, because now he knew there was something there. Something real. Something he should be able to reach but couldn't quite grasp. He leaned slightly against the edge of the table, careful not to touch it. It still looked like it might decide to react if he did. So, he said, shifting back toward what he assumed was his job, we are here to discuss a ceasefire, trade routes, and the possibility of mutual cooperation between two species that have spent the last decade misunderstanding each other. Yes. And instead, he gestured lightly between them, we are reconstructing my questionable childhood engineering decisions. They are relevant. Navarre raised an eyebrow. That's a bold claim. Ariseth stepped forward again, her movement precise, controlled, yet carrying an undercurrent of something more personal now. You built something together, she said. Navarre blinked. We built something that collapsed. You attempted to build something together, she corrected. That feels like a generous interpretation. It is an accurate one. He considered that, then nodded slowly. All right, I'll accept that as a technical success with catastrophic side effects. Your species often defines success that way. That is also accurate. A faint hum passed through the chamber as the surrounding holographic systems reactivated, shifting back into formal configurations. Star maps, resource projections, military overlays. The room was reminding them, gently but firmly, that this was supposed to be a negotiation. Navarre glanced at the data, then back at her. You're saying, he continued, that whatever happened back then is proof that cooperation is possible now. Yes, he tilted his head. That's a very long-term strategy. We do not rush outcomes. Navarre let out a quiet breath. That explains a lot about this conversation. Another pause settled between them, but it felt different now, less uncertain, more deliberate. He studied her again, more carefully this time, not as a queen, not as a political figure, but as someone trying to reconcile two versions of the same person. You've had 23 years to remember everything, he said. Yes. I've had about 23 minutes to catch up. That is also accurate. He nodded. I feel like I'm at a disadvantage. You are. Good, just checking. A faint flicker of amusement crossed her expression again. Navarre hesitated, then pushed forward. You said I wasn't supposed to remember you, he said, that it was for your protection. Yes. He crossed his arms. Protection from who? The question lingered. For the first time since the conversation began, Ariseth's gaze shifted. Not away, not evasive, but distant, as if she were briefly looking at something far beyond the chamber. From my own people, she said. Navarre straightened slightly. That sounds complicated. It was necessary. He studied her, the pieces beginning to align in ways that made him uncomfortable. You weren't just hiding, he said slowly. You were being hidden. Yes. And if they had known you were there, they would have removed me. Navarre winced. Removed feels like a very polite word. It is sufficient. He let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. So let me understand this, he said. You were living in a human settlement under a different identity, arguing with a child who had absolutely no idea who you were. You were learning. I was dismantling things. You were attempting to learn. I was failing to learn. Ariseth tilted her head slightly. That is still a form of learning. Navarre paused, then nodded. All right, I'll accept that. He looked at her again, something more serious settling into his expression. And then you left, he said. Yes. And you made sure I wouldn't remember you, he repeated. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, then more softly. Did you want me to? That question changed the room. Not the lights, not the systems. Those remained steady. But something beneath it all shifted. Ariseth did not answer immediately. For the first time, there was no quick precision, no controlled response waiting behind her expression. There was only a pause, a real one. Navarre held her gaze, not pushing, not retreating, just waiting. Finally, she said, No. The word was calm, even, and completely unconvincing. Navarre let out a small, quiet breath. Right, he said. He didn't argue, didn't press. But something in his expression suggested he had already decided not to believe her. He glanced down at the table again, then back up. You know, he said lightly, if this is your negotiation strategy, it's very effective. How so? You've managed to confuse me, unsettle me, and make me question my own memory, all before we've even discussed terms. That was not the intention. Then it's a very fortunate side effect. Another brief flicker of that almost smile. Navarre straightened again, returning, at least partially, to his role. All right, he said. Let's assume you're right. Let's assume that whatever happened back then proves something meaningful now. It does. He nodded once. Then I suppose, he said, We should find out what we're going to build this time. The words settled between them, simple, direct, and carrying far more weight than they appeared to. Ariseth regarded him quietly, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged. But something in the air shifted again. Not tension, not uncertainty. Something closer to recognition. Yes, she said. And this time, when she spoke, it did not feel like a memory. It felt like a beginning. The chamber adjusted again, as if it had finally remembered its original purpose. The table brightened, its surface reorganizing into clean, layered projections, trade routes stretching across star systems, disputed zones marked in cautious amber, and a slow pulse of red where conflict had recently burned too close to something irreversible. Navarre stared at it, then sighed. There it is, he said, the part where everything becomes complicated. It was always complicated, Ariseth replied. Yes, but earlier it was emotionally complicated, he said. Now it's administratively complicated. I find that less charming. One of his advisors made a quiet sound of agreement, quickly disguising it as a cough when the nearest alien attendant turned its head. Navarre leaned forward slightly, studying the projection. All right, let's see what we're dealing with. The system responded instantly, isolating a cluster of border systems. Several planets flickered into focus, some marked with human outposts, others with alien structures that looked less like buildings and more like deliberate manipulations of the landscape itself. That one, Navarre said, pointing. We thought it was uninhabited. It was, Ariseth said, until we began terraforming it. Navarre blinked. You started terraforming a planet without telling us? You began constructing orbital platforms without informing us? That was different. How? Navarre hesitated. We named ours. There was a pause. One of the alien attendants emitted a faint harmonic tone that might have been confusion. Ariseth regarded him steadily. You believe naming something grants you ownership. It grants us emotional attachment, Navarre corrected. Ownership is just a side effect. That explains much. Navarre nodded. We are a very emotionally attached species. The projection shifted again, highlighting a series of incidents, brief flashes of ships, signals, misunderstandings that escalated faster than anyone had intended. Navarre watched the sequence, his expression tightening slightly. We've both been reacting. Yes, that's a polite way of saying making things worse. Yes, he exhaled. I appreciate your consistency. Ariseth tilted her head slightly. Consistency is efficient. Navarre glanced at her, then back at the projection. You know, this is starting to feel familiar. How so? We see a problem, he said, gesturing at the pulsing red zones. We both think we know how to fix it. We both act on that assumption. And then everything collapses. You are describing your tower. I am describing a recurring pattern in my life, Navarre said. The tower was just an early example. For a brief moment, Ariseth's expression shifted again. That quiet, restrained amusement he was beginning to recognize. Then perhaps, she said, you have learned from it. Navarre considered that. I have learned that I should not be allowed near structural supports. That is a useful lesson. I try to apply it broadly. The tension in the room eased, just slightly. Navarre straightened, focusing again on the data. All right, let's try something different this time. Ariseth watched him. Define different. We stop assuming, he said. We stop reacting, and we start actually communicating. That is what we are doing. No, Navarre said. This, he gestured between them. This is something else. This is complicated history and partial memory in whatever this is. He tapped the table lightly, causing a ripple in the projection. I mean this, he said. Clear information. No guessing. No. I thought you meant this, so I did that. Ariseth was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped closer, her presence subtly shifting the light again. You are proposing a shared system, she said. Yes. A direct exchange of data. Yes. That would require trust. Navarre smiled faintly. That's usually how trust works. It is also how vulnerability works. That too. Another pause. Navarre tilted his head slightly. You don't like vulnerability. It is inefficient. It's also unavoidable, he said. At least for us. He gestured toward the projection again. Every mistake up there, that's what happens when two sides try to avoid being vulnerable. Ariseth studied the data, her gaze steady, analytical. And you believe your species is prepared for this? She asked. Navarre let out a quiet breath. Prepared? No, we're rarely prepared for anything. Then why propose it? Because we're tired, he said simply. The words settled differently than anything he had said before. Not light, not joking, just honest. Navarre ran a hand through his hair again, his posture loosening slightly. We've spent years reacting, defending, misunderstanding, he continued. At some point, you either keep doing that, or you try something that might actually work. Ariseth watched him, her expression unreadable. And if it fails, she asked. Navarre shrugged lightly. Then we'll have a very detailed record of exactly how we failed. That is not reassuring. It's progress, he said. We like progress, even when it's disappointing. A faint flicker of that almost smile again. You have not changed, she said. Navarre raised an eyebrow. I feel like I've changed a lot. You are still willing to attempt solutions without certainty. That's because certainty is usually wrong, he replied. Another pause. The chamber remained quiet, the projection steady, waiting. Finally, Ariseth moved. She extended her hand, not toward him, but toward the table. The system responded instantly, reorganizing the data, forming a new structure, two interconnected networks layered over each other, sharing information in real time. Navarre stared at it. That's fast, he said. We do not delay decisions, she replied. He nodded slowly. I'm starting to see that. He looked at the shared system, then back at her. This is a big step, he said. Yes, your advisors are going to have opinions. They always do. So do mine. Yes. Navarre smiled slightly. This is going to be complicated. Yes. He let out a quiet breath, then straightened. Well, he said, at least this time, we're building something together. Ariseth's gaze held his. For a brief moment, the vast, intricate projections faded into the background, and in their place, something simpler remained. Yes, she said. Navarre glanced back at the system, then added almost absent-mindedly, let's just try not to remove the stabilizer this time. There was a pause, then, very quietly, Ariseth replied, I will ensure that you do not. The shared system did not merely display information, it breathed. Navarre watched as streams of human data intertwined with alien constructs, each adjusting to the other in real time. Trade routes recalculated, border alerts softened into predictive warnings, and entire sectors of space, once marked in red, shifted cautiously toward a calmer, uncertain amber. He exhaled slowly. That's unsettlingly efficient. It is functioning as intended, Ariseth replied. That's what worries me, he said. Things that function this smoothly usually explode later. One of his advisors leaned closer and whispered, Please do not say explode during a peace negotiation. Navarre nodded slightly. Noted. I will replace it with unexpected structural reconfiguration. That is not better. Ariseth observed the exchange with quiet attention, her long ears angled slightly forward. Your advisors appear concerned, she said. They're professionals, Navarre replied. Concern is their natural state. That is inefficient. It keeps us alive, he said. Most of the time. The system pulsed again, drawing their attention back. A cluster of signals emerged, anomalies at the edge of the shared network. Small at first, almost insignificant, but persistent. Navarre frowned. That wasn't there before? No, Ariseth said. It was not. The projection zoomed in automatically, isolating the disturbance. Several unidentified signatures flickered into view, moving along a disputed corridor that had, until recently, been a quiet zone. Navarre leaned closer. That's not one of ours. It is not one of ours either. He tilted his head. That's rarely a good combination. The system began analyzing the signals, layering probabilities, projecting possible trajectories. The shapes were irregular, their movement patterns inconsistent with both human and alien vessels. Navarre's advisor spoke again, more urgently this time. Ambassador, those signatures are adapting. Adapting how? Navarre asked. They're changing their emission patterns in response to the system. Navarre blinked. So they're reacting to our shared network? Yes. He glanced at Ariseth. That feels like a very immediate test of our new cooperation. It does, she said. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Navarre straightened slightly. All right, let's not panic. You said that was an option. I'm choosing a different option, he said. Strategic calm. That is a form of controlled panic. I prefer to think of it as organized confusion. The signals shifted again, their paths aligning briefly, just long enough for the system to recognize a pattern. The projection responded instantly, highlighting a structure forming between the moving points. Navarre stared at it. That's not random, he said. No, Ariseth replied. It is not. The shape stabilized, a formation, deliberate, coordinated. Navarre's expression tightened. Someone else is out there. Yes, and they're watching us, he added. Yes, he let out a slow breath. Of course they are. We finally try to cooperate, and the universe decides to introduce a third party. That is consistent with observed patterns, Ariseth said. Navarre glanced at her. You've had this happen before? Frequently. That's not comforting. The system pulsed again, this time projecting possible outcomes. The unfamiliar signatures could be observing, probing, or preparing. None of the options were particularly reassuring. Navarre crossed his arms, thinking. Well, he said, at least this confirms something. What does it confirm? Ariseth asked. That we're not the only ones making questionable decisions in space. One of his advisors made a sound that was either agreement or quiet despair. Ariseth's gaze remained fixed on the projection, her expression focused, calculating. They are testing the system, she said. Navarre nodded. Then we should test them back. She looked at him. Explain. He gestured toward the shared network. If they're adapting to our data exchange, then they're expecting us to react in predictable ways. Yes, so we don't, he said. That is vague. It's a working concept, Navarre replied. We change the parameters, feed the system controlled variations, see how they respond. Ariseth considered this. You are suggesting we introduce uncertainty. Yes, that is inefficient. It's also effective, he said. Sometimes the best way to understand something is to confuse it. You have significant experience with confusion. Years of practice, Navarre said. A brief pause followed. Then unexpectedly, Ariseth gave a small, decisive nod. Proceed, Navarre blinked. That was faster than I expected. We do not delay decisions. Right, he said. I'm still adjusting to that. He turned to the projection, his posture shifting, less uncertain now, more focused. All right, he said. Let's see how our new system handles a little chaos. His fingers hovered over the interface, then made a series of precise inputs. The shared network responded immediately, altering its data flow, introducing subtle inconsistencies, shifting patterns just enough to disrupt any attempt at prediction. The effect was immediate. The unidentified signals reacted. Their formation wavered, then adjusted. Faster this time, sharper. Navarre watched closely. They're learning. Yes, Ariseth said, rapidly. That's impressive, he admitted, and slightly concerning. The system highlighted the changes, mapping their responses in real time. Navarre leaned in, studying the patterns. They're not just reacting, he said. They're anticipating. Ariseth's gaze sharpened. That would require access to predictive modeling, Navarre finished, or something very close to it. A quiet silence settled over the chamber. The implications were clear. Navarre exhaled slowly. All right, he said. So we're dealing with something that learns quickly, adapts faster, and is currently very interested in what we're doing. Yes, he nodded once. Good. I prefer clear problems. This is not a clear problem. It's clearer than before, he said. At least now we know we're not alone. He glanced at her, a faint, familiar smile returning despite the situation. Looks like we built something interesting enough to attract attention. Ariseth held his gaze for a moment. Then quietly, yes. Navarre looked back at the projection, his expression sharpening. Well, he said, I suppose the real question is, do we keep building? The signals shifted again, their formation tightening, focusing, watching, waiting. Navarre straightened, his voice steady now. Because if we stop, he added, they learn that we're afraid. Ariseth stepped forward, her presence aligning with his, her gaze fixed on the unknown. And if we continue, she said, they learn something else. Navarre nodded. Exactly. The unknown signals did not advance. They did not retreat either. They simply watched. Navarre found that deeply unsettling. Movement, even hostile movement, could be understood. Stillness, intentional stillness, meant something was thinking. Well, he said quietly, that's not ominous at all. One of his advisors whispered, it is extremely ominous. I was being optimistic, Navarre replied. The shared system pulsed again, feeding new layers of analysis into the projection. The formation held steady, but its internal structure shifted in subtle, precise ways, like a puzzle rearranging itself without changing its overall shape. They're waiting, Navarre said. Yes, Ariseth replied. He glanced at her. For what? Her gaze remained fixed on the projection. For us to decide. Navarre exhaled slowly. That's a lot of pressure for a first cooperative effort. You proposed cooperation, she said. I did. I was hoping for a slightly less immediate test. The signals flickered again. This time the system responded differently. Instead of projecting threat assessments, it began mapping communication probabilities, patterns that suggested not attack, not observation, but something else. Navarre leaned forward. That's new. They are attempting to interpret, Ariseth said. Interpret what? Us, Navarre blinked. So they're not preparing to attack? Not immediately. That is reassuring in a very limited way. He studied the patterns, his expression shifting from tension to something more focused, more deliberate. They reacted when we shared data, he said. They adapted when we introduced uncertainty. Yes, he nodded slowly. Then maybe they're not testing our strength. Ariseth turned her gaze toward him. What are they testing? Navarre hesitated, then carefully, our behavior. The idea settled between them. The chamber remained silent, as if waiting to see what they would do with it. Navarre straightened, his posture shifting. Less reactive now, more certain. All right, he said. Then let's give them something to interpret. Ariseth watched him closely. Explain. He gestured toward the shared system. We built this to understand each other, to stop guessing. Yes. So we use it, he said. Not to confuse them, not to hide, but to show them exactly what we're doing. That is vulnerability, she said. That is communication, he replied. A brief pause followed. Then slowly Ariseth nodded. Yes. Navarre allowed himself a small smile. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. He turned back to the projection, his hands moving with quiet precision. The shared system responded instantly, stabilizing its data flow. No distortions, no defensive variations. Clear, open. The effect was immediate. The unknown formation shifted. Not aggressively, not defensively. It aligned. Navarre watched closely, his expression tightening slightly. They're mirroring us. Yes, Ariseth said. The signals adjusted again, their internal structure simplifying, synchronizing with the patterns of the shared network. Navarre let out a slow breath. That's either very good or very bad. It is information, she replied. I'll take that, he said. The system pulsed once more, then, unexpectedly, translated a fragment. Not a full message, not a language, just a pattern. Recognition. Navarre stared at it. That's not an attack signature, he said. No. It's not a probe either. No. He hesitated. Then quietly. It's a response. Ariseth's gaze remained steady. Yes. The chamber held still as the pattern repeated. Clearer this time. recognition, acknowledgement. Navarre exhaled, tension leaving him in a slow, controlled release. "Well," he said, "that's new." One of his advisors whispered, "Is that good?" Navarre considered the projection, then nodded slightly. "It's not bad." "I will accept not bad," the advisor replied. The formation began to disperse, not retreating, not vanishing, but spreading outward, its presence softening, its structure dissolving into something less defined. Navarre watched it go. "They're leaving," he said. "Yes." He tilted his head slightly. "Or they've decided we're not immediately dangerous. That is also possible. I'll take that as a compliment." The system stabilized, the red zones fading further into amber, the shared network holding steady. For a moment, everything was quiet again. Not tense, not uncertain, just still. Navarre leaned back slightly, running a hand through his hair. "Well," he said, "that could have gone worse." "It could have," Ariseth agreed. He glanced at her, a faint smile returning. "We didn't remove the stabilizer." "No," she said, "you did not. That's progress." "Yes." Another pause settled between them, but this one felt different, complete. Navarre looked down at the table, then reached out, carefully this time, and picked something up. The photograph. He hadn't noticed when she had placed it there. He studied it again. The two children, the dust, the unfiltered certainty that whatever they were building would work, simply because they believed it would. He smiled just slightly. Then he looked up at her. "I think I remember a little more now," he said. Ariseth did not move. "What do you remember?" she asked. Navarre considered the question. "Not details," he admitted. "Just a feeling." He glanced back at the photograph. That I wasn't alone out there. A quiet breath passed between them. Then slowly he added, "And that someone kept telling me I was doing everything wrong." "That was accurate," she said. Navarre nodded. "I'm starting to see that." He looked at her again, more steadily now. "What was your name?" he asked. The question hung in the air. This time Ariseth did not hesitate. She stepped closer, her gaze meeting his, steady and clear. She spoke a word, soft, precise, unfamiliar. Navarre blinked, then frowned slightly. "I'm going to need you to say that again," he said. She repeated it. He tried, and failed, spectacularly. One of his advisors made a small choking sound. Navarre winced. "That was worse than I expected." "You have not improved," she said. "I've improved in other areas," he replied. "That remains to be seen." He smiled, not cautiously this time, not uncertainly, just simply. "I'll keep trying," he said. Ariseth regarded him for a moment. Then just slightly she inclined her head. "Yes," she said. Navarre glanced once more at the now stable projection, the quiet network linking two civilizations, the fading traces of something unknown that had chosen to observe rather than destroy. Then he looked back at her. "Looks like we built something that works," he said. Ariseth followed his gaze, her expression calm, composed, and just a little less distant than before. "Yes," she said. And this time there was no uncertainty in it at all.